This is Morning Express, and it's State of the Nation that we're discussing this morning. We'll sample your comments that are coming through via Twitter a little later on. And the Twitter handle is at Michael G. Gitonga or at Sophia Wanuna. Now, with me in the studio is Bill Okero, Senator for Mandera, and also Moses Kajwang, Senator for Homa Bay. And today we're just discussing the State of the Nation, 52 years of Madaraka. Are we proud to where we are? What are some of the milestones that we should have achieved by now? What are some of the gains that we've had? And Bill Okero, I'll bring you in on this one, and it's in regards to the northern region. It has forever and for a long time been referred to as another Kenya. Why has it remained another Kenya, and what are some of the things that need to be done for it to feel included as really as part of the country that it is?
One of the former British colonial governors, I think, is it Eliot, referred to that region as the part of Kenya that many other Kenyans do not know about, and even worse, the careless. I think for a long time that has been the challenge you've had, that northern Kenya, starting all the way to Turkana, Pokot, and all these things you hear about Samburu, Northeast, and all these regions, and regions that have not been mainstreamed into the national if you will, development or economy of this country, and so the only thing that ever filters out of that part of the country has been the negative narrative of insecurity and starvation and those kind of things. That's the only thing that the only time media, for example, travels to that part of the country is when there is some killing or when there is some death due to starvation, or that kind of thing. So the unfortunately the successive regimes in this country have, in the same way that the colonialists neglected that part of the country, when we first formed our government in 1965, we came up with the sessional papers number 10 and others and so forth. I think we went ahead and perpetuated the same kind of prejudice against the region, and so today those regions still remain inaccessible. One, because they still remain marginalized in terms of infrastructure. When you talk about northern Kenya, in most parts of northern Kenya, like northeastern province, is inaccessible because of lack of infrastructure. Even as we pump in billions, hundreds of billions into infrastructure, you don't talk about that part of the world. Yeah, completely. You talk of education today in the whole of northeastern province. Education has collapsed the last 1 year because teachers, for lack of security, have moved out of that region. And you don't see, it's not even worth mentioning. It's a disaster what's going on. A whole generation of youth in their hundreds of thousands are out of school because the schools don't have teachers. And government has not, forget about the government, the president gives a speech, and this is why I wrote a letter to the president, that this is not acceptable, that you can ignore a whole region and don't talk about the challenges that region, and even don't talk about what you want to do about that situation. And then you talk about the insecurity. The whole of that region, how many counties? Nearly 4 or 5 counties are under curfew. This day and age, when we're spending over 200 billion shillings on security, and we have hundreds of thousands of security officers, you don't understand why. For example, we have military bases in every part of this city, Nairobi, Mombasa, and everywhere else, and you don't have them in northeastern province. Why would we have these people here?
Okay. On your letter to the president, you do mention that one of the things that you would appreciate is if he even visited the area, which he has not done, despite the Garissa attack that we had, and we lost a number of young people. What are some of the other measures that you feel would be effective in having a positive impact in having this part of the country feel it is part of Kenya?
Well, I think one is that I mentioned, that, for example, for Northeastern, I think the most fundamental area is that area of eliminating this discrimination in terms of opportunities and in terms of identity documents, because it's really a major challenge in that part. You cannot move. The movement, the free movement of people enshrined in the Bill of Rights, it's not there in Northeastern province. You don't have documents, you can't move. To travel from Mandera to Nairobi, you go through hundreds of roadblocks simply because it's still nobody. And yet we have government. There is a way in which governments can secure their borders, really, but treat the people within the border as part of the country. But when you put the border at the bridge in Garissa, And then anybody coming from beyond there, you're subjected to, it's like you're coming from another country.
Different country.
I think there's need to enhance that sense of belonging by addressing that issue of identity and addressing that issue of discrimination. I say because when you have the only university in that county, in that region, only university is now shut down completely. Instead of saying, okay, fine, there was an incident, but let us enhance security, let's repair, let us get back. But you say close it and let's go. Move it completely. I mean, you're not really helping the situation. And all of the tertiary institutions in the same way have been affected. I think there's need to really, stand up to the challenges of terrorism, but to also ensure that people should feel that they are part of this country by going back, by putting security, by giving people encouragement that, look, the government is there. But more importantly, what we suggested as leaders from the area is that if indeed this is a Somali problem, give the Somalis the opportunity to do the fighting. We have hundreds, thousands of Somalis in the security establishment. Send them there, let them look after the area. We will be able to make a difference. But you don't trust Somalis, you don't post them to that region in security officers. You don't put them in the leadership. You don't. So who is going to look after that region? So you have, you leave that area completely exposed. You have a challenge in terms of security, but you don't give the security officers the adequate logistics. They don't have transport, they don't have vehicles, they don't have money, and you expect them to go ahead and fight terrorists.
They'll not be able to.
But I think for me, the government needs to focus particularly on the area of infrastructure, because if there are roads, even accessibility, even movement, response time would have been reduced. But today, one of the biggest challenges is the lack of communication. I think the government really needs to invest particularly in infrastructure, and do something about education. Because if education, enrollment in schools in that part of the country was 110%, 100% like it is in most parts of this country, today we would not be having really most of these problems. Because half the problems we have in our area, the people who get enrolled into these terrorist activities and so forth, and militias and what have you, are people who have not gone to school in our area. It's different from other parts of the country. There are people who have not gone to school, there are people who have no jobs, there are people who feel we are dropouts from schools, and poverty is still the highest. Over 70% of the people were, and still 50 years after independence, you are giving them permanent relief.
Okay, I'm going to come shortly to division of revenue, and I'd want you to comment on that. But before we go there, Moses, do you feel that leaders in the northern region have been left to fight their own battle on their own? Do you feel that leaders from other regions should put their weight behind what he's saying and see whether we can actually have them included? It seems like they just speak on their own.
Oh, definitely, the northern part of Kenya is part of Kenya. And it is not an agenda that we should leave to Senator Bill Okero alone. And I think that also is a sign of collective failure in our leadership, that we tend to focus on our backyards and say that Northeastern will take care of itself and its leadership will take care of the problem. Not many things have changed in our politics in Kenya, unfortunately, since 1963, in the 52 years. And I'll tell you why. In the Moi regime, if an area felt left out, a few sons and daughters would be appointed to the cabinet, and then they would be told, now you have it. Right now, you'll be told that the leader of the majority comes from Northeastern. The foreign secretary comes from Northeastern. A presidential advisor comes from Northeastern. And you'll be given a toll of so many other people, high-ranking, and you'll be told, why are they saying they're excluded, yet their people are in government? I think developing a region goes much more beyond giving tokens to individuals whose qualification probably could be psychophancy and hawkishness. What we need to do for Northeastern and the northern frontier, we need a proper master plan. I struggle to define the ideology, the economic plan of the Jubilee government. Probably in the Mboya days we had this social, sessional paper and its social democracy and all that. In the Moi days we knew we were to fuata nyayo. In Kibaki days we knew there was a vision 2030. I'm still struggling to place my finger on the economic and political ideological plan of the Jubilee government. But whatever plan Jubilee comes up with, the northern region the northeastern part must be part of it, because that is where we have a lot of natural resources. You know, that is one thing that people forget. If it is oil, that's where it is. If it is other natural resources, you saw the water, the water that was found in Turkana, which is still part of that northern, the general northern area. So the master plan and the Marshall Plan that will propel Kenya to the next level is one that incorporates the northern region. We cannot just think of a future. You know, we are not like Singapore. Singapore, which our president has confessed that he idolizes Lee Kuan Yew, the former leader of Singapore. Singapore had different challenges. As we have natural resources, we cannot grow an economy based on M-Pesa and commercial banks and insurance companies that are growing, and yet tourism is dying, agriculture is dying, and the people of a vast area who are sitting on natural resources are left unattended. If we do that, this country is going to explode. So it is not a problem for the leadership of Northeastern alone. Okay. This is a national problem.
All right, let's go to, before we go to division of revenue, Bill Okero, you've talked about infrastructure and the fact that, it has remained a challenge in that particular area. However, we do have devolved governments now. We do have devolved counties, and that is a devolved, when it comes to infrastructure, what has the local government done to deal with that? Because that is no longer a national function.
True, yes. The roads, county roads, and some of the infrastructure like building of health facilities and so forth has now been devolved, ECD centers and so forth. I think what most of the county governments have focused on really is to try and do the small county roads which fall within their mandate. You'll appreciate that the definition of the county roads is still a matter that is yet to be determined. It's in fact gone to court when the government dilly-dallied on that matter and declined to let go of Kura and Kera and so forth. But I think a number of these counties are really putting in, maraming there, because the kind of resources we are talking about is not the kind of money that you can use for building highways really, or these big roads and tarmacking them. So what people are doing is use the money for putting up graveling of the rural roads that connect the sub counties and so forth. And I think in that regard, yes, it's helping, but it's not adequate. I mean, the construction of roads is very expensive. For example, in some of those areas like Mandara, you'll find that the cost of doing even 1 kilometer of the road up to bitumen level can go even close to 100 million.
Okay, but surely the local government cannot continue blaming the national government for lack of infrastructure, yet it is a devolved function. They're expected to do that. Correct,
but that is why then as a Senate we've been focusing on the supply side. You have to give them the money. What are we talking about? Out of a budget of 2 trillion shillings nationally, we're talking of counties getting 283 is what we've been pushing for. It took us into mediation to get even that 283 billion shillings. So when you spread that over 47 counties, really you're talking about a county getting 6-7 billion, 8 billion maximum. 9 probably the one that the highest will get. So it's not a lot of money, and you have to provide services that have for functions that have been devolved, like health services that consumes a significant amount. There is payroll. They have to pay for all the public servants working there. You have to do operations and maintenance. And so it's really counties may not spend more than 30% of that on development. So when you talk of 283, the maximum amount of money that goes into development across the 47 counties, you're talking of 60, 70 or 80 billion maximum, because some counties don't even raise 30 because of the overheads.
Okay. Michael, yes. Just if I was to contribute to that point, the monies that we distribute to the counties sometimes makes the assumption that all counties are starting from an equal footing, which is not true. Of course, in the criteria for revenue allocation, there could be certain factors, there could be certain weights that come in to make the distinction. But I don't think those factors really, when you get the result in terms of allocation, I don't think it really takes into account the historical marginalization. The crafters of our constitution foresaw that, and we set up an equalization fund to which
which is yet to be
0.5% of national revenues would be put, and that would be used to fast track some of those areas that had been marginalized. 0.5 is nothing. So the expectation on county governments, yes, is very high, but they do not have adequate resources to carry out those tasks. Those of us in the opposition have said we need to increase the allocation to county governments to at least 45% of national revenues, with the realization that there are certain areas that have got such significant challenges that you need to give them much more than other areas. But if we go by the current situation where only 15%, minimum of 15% goes to the county governments, we need to start seeing the central government using the 85% that it retains to come up with far-reaching infrastructural developments that can open up these areas so that the county governments can now just deal on the last mile issues within the neglected areas.
All right. Still on devolution, Bill Okero, and this is in regards to a proposal that was given by leaders from the northern region of having a security ministry, having security devolved. How exactly would that work out, and how would that help the region, improve the security situation?
I don't think devolving security fully, in the sense that units or security agencies, some security agencies have to come.
But there was a proposal to have a security ministry specifically in that region.
Not really. I don't think it's a security ministry for that region. I think if you're talking about a proposal to have a homeland security, or by some of the frankly, I don't think much about that, because it's just about a name, really. But it's the packaging. But I think what we have here is not about lack of the security agencies. There are adequate security agencies in this country, and in terms of coordination is where there's a challenge, and probably an attempt to try and create that homeland is to address that issue of coordination, if I understood it. But for us, I think what we're saying is there has to be an involvement. There has to be a place for the county leadership in the security of their county. I think for us that is important, because without the involvement of the community, you cannot address problems like that of terrorism or any of these security challenges. And you can only do that if there is an entry point for the county leadership. In terms of discussing, in the structure that we have now, when you talk of a county or district security committee, it's just those commanders of the security forces.
But isn't that already in place, given that there is a chain of command before the information gets to the top office? It comes from the region. There is a chain of command, given the leaders in that particular area are the ones who are going to deal with that particular incident.
There isn't. As we speak now, the county security committee, the leaders who sit down to discuss the security in a particular county are the commanders and the county commissioner, those security agents, commanders. There is no involvement by any leader. You don't have a governor sitting in it. You don't have a senator or any other leader.
So should we have
county.
A governor and a senator from
I think
every
what
region?
we said is that
proposing?
It doesn't make sense that you talk about security of a county. You talk about, in the morning, you have a meeting to discuss what are the challenges, and you don't have, imagine all those leaders could be, or security leaders could be from outside that county, and you don't have an involvement from any of the local participants. It doesn't make sense, because without this leadership, how do you then mainstream the views from the public? How do you get that public engagement or involvement, which is a constitutional requirement, that in any matter affecting the decision, any decision affecting the people, you must have their input, you must have their participation. And that is why we're saying that government needs to look at the structure, really, and allow people, leadership in the county, to be involved to some extent, really, even if it means those security officers briefing there has to be that, that collaboration. Without it, it becomes very difficult.
So are you proposing that we need to have a senator, a governor? How exactly is that? How is that inclusivity going to be in that security committee? How does it work?
Well, I think in some counties what happens informally is in that security committee, you can involve, for example, the governor to sit in that meeting, because he has two advantages. One, he gets to know what goes on within his people. He has also a whole lot of a department. Most of them have departments that deal with also security matters as governors. They're on their own. That allows, gives them the opportunity to get information, to get intelligence. And secondly, he can also input in terms of resources. They assist even as we speak. A lot of discounters actually spend substantial amounts of money on logistics, provide them with fuel, provide them with transport, provide them with all these things. So it doesn't have to be one way that you just provide things but you don't get an input. I think that, I'll give you an example in Mandera when the bus incident happened and the quarry incident and so forth. One of the things that our governor mentioned is that he has been providing information in writing to the security committee, in writing to them, and yet there has been no action on it. But if he was sitting in that team, he did not have just sent letters. He would have simply, actually they would have discussed and said, yes, I have this information. There's likely to be something happening in XYZ place. Can we do something? I'll provide some logistics, I'll provide some transport. I mean, so I think that there need to be a role like that.
Okay.
In my view.
Let's go to division of revenue, and Senator Moses Kajwang, I'll bring in on this. And there seems to almost be a vindictive, measures taken by the Senate, given there was this tussle of the 3.3 billion, and it just seems like we're using resources to whip one another and punish one another. What are your comments on that, given the state as it is right now?
The hullabaloo around the division of revenue is really not even a technical or an accounting issue. It is a political issue. After a lot of threats and a lot of chest thumping, fortunately the National Assembly yesterday passed the version and agreed to give the 3.3 billion additional to the county governments. 3.3 billion out of the 200 and something billion that had initially been proposed was just about 1%. Initially, Senate had proposed, I think, 7.7 billion as an additional allocation, which would have been maybe 2-point-something%. So the national debate has been on a mundane 1-point-something% increased allocation, which is going directly to help people in the level 5 hospitals, and is also going to help strengthen the capacity of the county assemblies. But if you saw the heat that has been generated, it really was not on the accounting or the economic fundamentals. The Constitution of Kenya establishes Parliament and recognizes that Parliament comprises of Senate and the National Assembly. The problem we have had is that there are elements within the National that what Senate does is directly stated in the Constitution, and this is born out of local competition back in the counties. A member of Parliament feeling that the senator is eyeing his seat, or a member of Parliament eyeing the seat of a senator. So these are the underlying issues that then erupt in the National Assembly. I don't want to criticize and condemn the National Assembly collectively, but there are elements within the National Assembly that are not serving the national interest. But where I want to lay the blame squarely, the Jubilee government in its legislative agenda, it has failed. Because we have been subjected to tyranny, and now we are being subjected to a lot of chest thumping and vendetta and vindictiveness. Senate is suffering. The 1 billion allocation that Senate had requested, compare that 1 billion to what MPs usually, to what National Assembly gets in the form of CDF. The 1 billion was supposed to facilitate senators to be effective in their monitoring and evaluation role. Remember, there is an act of Parliament, even though it is in court right now, called the County Development Board Act, which sets up a forum where all elected leaders come together to set priorities and look at budgets, etc., for the county. If that act was to be operationalized and the senator does not have a fund, what then is his role? His role then will just be to come for meetings and then go back to Nairobi. So it was to support the operationalization of that act in the event that the court rules in the favor of Senate. But then you chop it And you say it in the open that you are chopping it because Senate is not playing ball. You go to the judiciary, you chop the allocation simply because they made an informed ruling that you must involve the Senate in division of revenue. You go to SRC and you chop the allocation simply because they have reduced per diems. That is not the way to build a nation. And I want to, within the National Assembly, the leadership of the various coalitions, we need to put the national interest ahead of our own personal interests. In fact, wananchi are saying that the National Assembly is such a petty place that they cannot tolerate anyone else being called a Mheshimiwa. You remember there was the bill that came out of there that no one else should be called Mheshimiwa. The public right now, and I can tell you this for sure because I've come from the village, Kenyans are so concerned about staying afloat in this flooded country that they might think that the battle between the National Assembly and Senate is a small matter. But we will pay the price if we start to bastardize institutions at this point in time. The monies that go to counties, if Senate is not strengthened, if Senate is not facilitated to play its oversight role, that money might as well end up in individual, in the pockets of individuals.
Let me add a bit on this. It's been very diplomatic on our colleagues. I think our colleagues, some of our colleagues in the National Assembly suffer an abetted sense of inferiority complex, really. And this is what plays out whenever they look at their mandate within the allocation of revenue. Because what they did yesterday was retributional, really. It's to try and punish institutions rather than look at the, carry out their mandate. Because that mandate is a trust provided in the Constitution. That allocative role is given to them in trust, and they are required to exercise it in accordance with the Constitution. In fact, in my view, in pursuant to Chapter 6, what they're engaging in is an abuse of office, right? Frankly speaking. I mean, you cannot do that kind of thing. You punish institutions because you don't like what they're doing. It also defeats logic. You allocate 283 billion to counties, and half the time you spend lamenting that the Senate is not providing oversight, yet when Senate asks for money to do that oversight over that 283 billion, you chop it off. So in a sense, you're being, what accountants like me would call penny-wise and pound-foolish. You don't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is to safeguard that 283 billion. So I think it's time that Kenyans start looking critically at that allocative role of the National Assembly, because to some extent, over the years, that skewed allocation of resources has been responsible for the inequitable development in many parts of this country, and also for the misplaced priorities. You find that's why our security systems collapsed those years, because money was not being given to the right institutions that required resources because of the roles that they play in society. So it's about a bargain. You like my face, you give me money. You don't like my face, you don't give me money. That's not the essence of budgetary role that has been given to institutions. But I also want to indict to the Treasury. I think if anything, in the last 2-3 years, what we have seen is Treasury has completely abdicated its responsibility, because ultimately the role of budgeting is there for the government, the executive. They should not play ball with the National Assembly so that they can get their little things done. Because, for instance, the High Court ruled that CDF is unconstitutional.
Correct.
And that it should be wound up in the next 12 months. How does Treasury go ahead and allocate 35 billion shillings to a fund that has been declared unconstitutional? And so it doesn't make sense. For instance, when Senate recommended that additional 3.3 billion, we went ahead and actually specifically identified those areas in the national government estimates that from where the money can come from. It need not have gone, they need not have reduced money from judiciary or SRC or Senate or any other institution.
And use their power to whip institutions.
There are other areas that we have identified which actually you find money is completely being wasted. And I think National Assembly needs to appreciate that whereas the counties are looking at 283 billion that Senate is looking at in terms of its oversight, they need to worry about what happens to the remaining 1.8 trillion shillings. That's where they're required to provide oversight. Much of the wastage of resources and the inefficiencies and the corruption is in the national government. You would never see national assemblies really focusing on that and saying, look, you guys are wasting money and we're going to cut down from this ministry or from that ministry. I'll give you an example. Even when the functions have actually been devolved, like Minister of Health, 90%, over 90% of the functions have actually been devolved completely to the counties. Yet over 50 billion shillings have been allocated in this budget to Ministry of Health. The total amount of money that 47 counties are able to allocate from their respective budgets to health is less than 40 billion. And yet you're putting 50 billion in the headquarters. You don't explain to the treasury, to the ministries, that why are you still having these people there? Why are you still having that ministry there? The same thing with agriculture, the same with water, the same with many other ministries whose functions have actually been devolved. So they completely are engaged in really a petty politics rather than addressing the fundamental issues affecting the nation.
All right, let's just take a look at health before we wind up, because I think we've only got like 5 minutes. Moses Kajwang, and to the Mwananchi, there was the 38 billion shilling devolvement and equipment given to counties by the president, which was, you know, with a lot of pomp and color. And to the Mwananchi, that looks like it's really something good, but there are undercurrents that the local government was not involved, and as a result they feel like it's not going to work out. Maybe you can clear for us what really is the problem, and secondly, isn't that a good initiative by the government?
Michael, good intentions should never usurp constitutional provisions.
Correct.
The government has got good intentions in providing some of these advanced medical equipment to counties. But what is instances and the process and procedure for sharing or transferring some of these roles? And it says there has to be consultation, and an agreement has to be entered into by the different levels of government. What the governors are saying is that, yes, this looks like a good deal. Give us the details before we can sign the MOU. The central government says that, forget about the details. We are giving you this thing. You're not going to pay a cent. So you just sign on the dotted line and take the equipment home. This smells like a scandal. And in an open environment, and I think one of our values in the Constitution, access to information, openness and transparency. I see no reason why the central government is not providing the information and the details and the data that has been requested by the Council of Governors.
I have looked at this matter from the perspective of the work of my committee, and I've had an opportunity to discuss with the governors who are dealing with that matter, both from the financial aspect and from the health aspect. I think the question is more about I agree that health is a function of the county governments. The national government ought to have consulted extensively on that matter with the county governments. That I agree there's been questions on the level of consultation on that matter. But nonetheless, I think the deal itself, it's a good deal. Far much better than any you will ever get. That's what I have seen. It's just the politics that now have got into it, and I think what I've advised personally, I've tried to advise governors that, look, you guys, whatever the national government has done, they've done a mistake in terms of not consulting you or getting involved. But now it's like giving you equipment free. Is actually hiring. This thing is not about just a lease. It's not a lease actually. It's like outsourcing. You're actually providing some equipment. You are training the workers. You will provide maintenance for the next 7 years. There's no cost to you. If I was a governor, it would be a good deal. As long as it's not cost to me. I'm not going to maintain it. I'm not going to repair it. I'm not going to do anything. My guys will be trained. I just need to hire those guys. It's a good deal. It includes so many things. But I think the governors seem to have been preoccupied with how much did it cost those guys, and why were we not involved in procurement, and that aspect, because if that burden has been passed to the national government, whether they pay 10 times or whatever it is up to the national government. I mean, as a county government, it's like getting similar equipment from donors. We have actually programs that donors fund in hospitals. It's similar.
Okay.
So if you can accept from donors, you should also accept from government. But I think in terms of apart from that aspect of trying to get into functions that belong to, I don't think there's any other obligation really on the counties, and I think they should. But going forward, I think it will be a lesson to the national government that they need to really involve.
Of course, there's also the issue of how to run the equipment once it gets there, because I'm not sure we have qualified
there's a
staff
training.
that can actually
There's training
run it.
component.
Sorry?
There's a training component involved.
Okay.
Yeah,
that comes
included.
with it.
Yeah.
All right, and that's as you wind up. Because,
Michael, my county is one of those that have signed the dotted line, and I have no qualms in my governor for signing. But ultimately, we cannot say that since the counties are not going to pay anything, it's a good deal. The central government is still going to pay. With whose money? The taxes that you pay. So there's need for transparency and there's need for openness. And it is good that the Senate committee has looked into it. What we are seeing is there's a lot of heat but no light in this particular matter. What we need to see is a lot of openness so that these things can be put out.
I think governors ought not to have gone to court because they had brought a petition to the Senate. And Senate was going to look at it, and then last week they went to court. I think it really was not necessary. The reason why I looked at the cost and I found it really competitive is because they are getting this thing directly from manufacturers, and when you look at really buying it off the shelf and getting it with the terms that include maintenance and so forth. So there is need for Senate to have looked at it.
All right, gentlemen, I'm told we are out of time and we'll have to wind it up right there. Thank you so very much for coming into the studio and discussing with us the state of the nation. And for you at home, we'll be sampling your comments later on the show. But for now, we'll have to wind it right there in terms of the state of the nation. But do get yourselves ready shortly. We're going to be keeping fit and sweating it out with a bit of Zumba. It's been a while since we did Fitness Thursday, so, well, it's back and back with a bang.